Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God." And so the question that I think needs to be answered is, what is the connection between making peace and being called a child of God? I don't think the answer to that question is evident and obvious right there on the surface. But upon further review and reflection and study, I think that the answer is implicit in the previous verse. The previous verse says that the pure in heart are blessed, for they will see God. And when we looked at that verse, we looked at Psalm number 24. And in Psalm 24 is a question. The question is, who will ascend the hill of the Lord? Meaning, who is worthy to go up the hill of the Lord and stand in the holy presence of God? The answer to that question was only the person whose external words and works and internal thoughts, intents, affections are pure. Clean hands stand for who a person is on the outside, and heart stands for who someone is on the inside. And so the answer to the psalmist's question is only the person with clean hands and a pure heart is able to ascend the hill of the Lord and stand in the presence of God. Now, when I was a kid and I would go to the mall, my number one favorite thing to do at the mall was to try to run up the down escalator. And so there's those stairs just keep going down and down. And I thought through strategy and strength, I could ascend the hill of the down escalator. Strategically, of course, you want to wait until nobody's coming down. And then after that, in my stupid little boy brain, I thought that if I strategically skipped every other step, that through my brains and through my power, I could move my feet quickly enough to get all the way up the down escalator. And I would do it, and for the first 2, 3, 4 steps, you could fool yourself into believing that you were going to make it. But at the angle and the pace of the escalator, I never quite made it. In fact, the ground was moving against me, moving under me, and the harder I tried, the more I realized how impossible the task was. And that's a little bit like trying to get to God spiritually. You think that you can outsmart and out-hustle and outwork your sin nature. You can tell yourself for 2, 3, 4 years, you know what, self? My hands are almost clean. But the more you work and the more you effort and the more you strategize about ways to clean yourself up and get to God, the more it becomes apparent that even if you get your hands clean, you're never going to get your heart clean. You're never going to change the motivations. You're never going to change your sinful thought patterns. And so a despair sets in. And in this despairing of your own righteousness, and in this sense of impossibility that you could ever ascend the down escalator of your own sinfulness, in this dread and fear that you feel at being in the presence of a holy God, in steps the good news of Christianity. In steps Christmas. And we find out that the whole point of Christianity is not our ascent, but God's descent. Jesus comes at Christmas. He comes down because we can't go up. And so now we're finally answering the question. What then is the connection between being a peacemaker and being called a child of God? Well, I think the answer is this. Why did Jesus come down? Jesus came down at Christmas and stayed until Good Friday to make peace. Who did he come to make peace for? Between a holy God who is at the top of the hill and people with dirty hands and even dirtier hearts. Jesus came to be a peacemaker between a holy God and you, a wreck. a moral failure. So Jesus came to be a peacemaker. And so if that is the central mission of the Christ, then you, as a little Christ, a follower of Christ, though in a different way, and though to a much, much less degree, it's your mission as well to also be a peacemaker. And so to the degree that you're a peacemaker, you are called the son of God, a daughter of God, a child of God. And so our job too, as the church, is to model Christ and do the thing that Christ did. And so Christ came to bring peace between God and humanity, and so it is the church's mission to bring peace between God and humanity. Again, not in the same way and not to the same degree, but through making disciples, through sharing the gospel, we too work that peace. But the Apostle Paul then goes on in Ephesians chapter 2 to say, but wait, the work of Jesus' peacemaking does not end there. That is central to Jesus' peacemaking, but that's not all. It spills over into human-human relationships. And so he talks about national and ethnic Jew-Gentile relations, and even trickles down eventually at the end of the book of Ephesians into all of our most intimate personal relationships. And so Christians are to be peacemakers, not only in sharing the gospel, but in bringing racial, national reconciliation and peace and forgiveness and compassion in personal relationships. Oh, that was all cute, and that was all nice. But we've probably never been moved before by Jesus' promise of blessing to the peacemakers. We've probably never been convicted too much about that promise because we have a counterfeit or wrong idea of what being a peacemaker means. And our wrong idea causes us to falsely believe that we are simply okay and have nothing to worry about in this arena, because we falsely define what being a peacemaker is. We think that peace is the absence of conflict. And so if someone were to ask you, would you rather America be at war or not at war? You would obviously choose to not be at war. And if the person were to then ask you, would you rather be in a giant fight and shouting match with someone in your immediate family? Or would you rather not? And of course, we would rather not. So therefore, we falsely conclude that we are peaceful people because we don't want conflict. That is not what the Bible, that is not what Jesus means by being a peacemaker. A counterfeit peacemaker could just be a lazy person, a person who isn't passionate about anything, a doormat of a person, a apathetic person. There's lots of reasons why we would not want conflict, and many of them aren't necessarily good. One need only look back at the gospel, one need only look back at the life and death of Jesus to understand what peacemaking in the Bible entails. And so the question needs to be asked, what did it cost Jesus? What was the nature? What was the heart of Jesus' peacemaking? In other words, how did Jesus make peace between a holy God and those who can't ascend the hill of the Lord? Well, it cost him his life. It cost him his entire life, and it drove him to the cross. So it cost Jesus everything to absorb the debt to create a peaceful situation between God and humans. And so this, unfortunately, is characteristic of all sin. Once a sin has occurred in a relationship, a debt is now owed, and a debt must be paid for there to be peace. Picture you have parked your car on the street to run an errand. Someone is driving on the street, not paying attention, and they run into your car, totaling your car. What are your options here? Option number one, you ask the person to pay the debt. You ask the person's insurance company to pay the debt. Option number 2, you try to be a peacemaker, you try to be forgiving, and you just don't fix your car. Option number 3, you try to be a loving peacemaker and you pay to fix your car. But inescapably, unavoidably, an error, a sin has occurred, a traffic sin has occurred, and now, unavoidably, a debt must be paid. The only question is, will the other person pay? Will you pay? Will you try not to pay? Because even when you don't pay, you still went from having a functioning vehicle to a totaled vehicle. So in order for there to be shalom, for there to be wholeness, for there to be peace, for there to be order, a debt must be paid. And the only question is, will the other person pay it or will you pay it? And so in order to be a peacemaker, we must be the ones who are rich enough in character, rich enough in soul to absorb the debt. And so perhaps you're in a relationship and someone has betrayed your trust. Someone has told a lie and it has cut you deeply and it has hurt you beyond repair. And so what would being a peacemaker look like in that situation? Well, it's really a question of, will you make them pay, or will you take on some or all of the payment in order to create peace and harmony and friendship and wholeness and forgiveness? Now, you can make them pay by bringing the sin up over and over again. You can make them pay by sarcastically bringing every conversation back to their fault and failure, or by making sort of a cartoonish version of them in your head and thinking of them only in terms of their one sin, even though you have lied in your life before. Yet all you can think of the person is defined by their sin. Or can we be followers of Christ who are free to forgive and blessed as peacemakers and take on some of the debt of their sin? And that's what Jesus is getting at here by this blessing to peacemakers. Can we make peace by understanding who we are apart from Jesus? By some self-knowledge, by some gospel knowledge, and look at a broken relationship, look at a hurt that someone has caused us by their dishonesty. Can we look into that situation and be peacemakers and absorb some of the debt, just like Jesus absorbed all of the debt due your sin? Can we muster up the humility, the gospel humility, to understand that we are capable of any sin that anyone else has committed? And very likely, in most relationships, we have committed the exact same sin that we are so hurt when someone commits against us. And so being a peacemaker would look like us not exacting all of the revenge, not bringing it up. The whole point of the gospel is that God no longer judges us by our past. God no longer brings up all of our past failures. What does he look at instead? He looks at the work of Christ, who absorbed all of our guilt and all of our shame. And so if we really believe that, if that gospel message has really become the central thing in our heart and mind, how can we then not look at those in our personal life who have offended us so much less, who have hurt and violated us so much less than we have violated God, and not extend to them at least a little of that same peacemaking, at least a little of that same forgiveness? And so once we understand the gospel for ourselves, it should transcend into our personal relationships. Once we understand that God has taken the entire initiative in making peace with us, And not only did God take the entire initiative to make peace with us, he took the entire cost, the entire debt. God had to give his only son in order for there to be peace with you. Now, look at that, and now look at a hurt that you have absorbed in a personal relationship. Can't you extend that offending party some of the grace that you have been extending? The more we understand the gospel, the more we will understand what it means to be a peacemaker. And when we're peacemakers, then we can be truly called sons and daughters of God, because we're more and more like Christ, not exacting revenge, but rather absorbing the great hurt and the great separation that sin always causes.